I've explained to Tom that we're approaching our event here a little differently than most do, and that we start off each session with a little polling of you so he can get some idea of what you're thinking on key issues. It shows up on these screens on either side here. We've got 8 quick questions. We'll do them very rapidly. So the first question is, during the next decade, I believe U.S. defense spending, excluding for direct war-related expenses compared to current levels, will decline A, substantially, more than 10%, B, moderately, 5 to 10%, C, only slightly, under 5%, D, not at all, it'll remain the same, or E, it will grow in absolute percentage in terms of GDP. You can see this takes just 8 seconds to tally up everybody in the room. And we come out at only slightly, which is not entirely shocking. We have yet to be really shocked by an answer, by the way. Next. The U.S. needs to develop new alliances and new global institutions if it is to successfully meet the security challenges of the next decade. True or false? It's an easy question, but we can't seem to get anybody to talk about those. So 84%. Next. It will be important for the U.S. and other leading nations to agree on a set of standards and acceptable practices in the areas of drone warfare and cyber warfare during the decade ahead. True or false? 73% say it will be important to develop those. Next. The greatest single threat to U.S. national security right now is A, domestic economic problems, fiscal, B, domestic economic problems, growth and investment related, C, international economic upsets, D, terrorism, conventional cyber or WMD, E, the rise of powerful new rivals, F, climate change, or G, other. And we can come back to other when we do our questions. And so the 2 leading answers are domestic economic problems of one sort or another. Next. The greatest single threat to U.S. national security 10 years from now, and it's the same list. And as we guess along, of course, the answer is E, completely predictable, but odd unanimity. Next. In fact, yeah, I think that was a fixed question. Next. Policy planning is tabulating all the votes. The most important problem to solve in the Middle East right now is A, Syria, B, Israel-Palestine, C, Iranian nuclear weapons production, D, destabilizing effects of the Arab Spring, E, potential upsets in Iraq, F, seeking successful exit from Afghanistan, G is other, and H is you're missing the point. None of these can be solved independently of one another. I will put all the money in my wallet on which answer it will be. And, oh, gee, it was close. I'm glad I didn't do that. But yes, H did edge out Israel-Palestine. But interestingly, Israel-Palestine was the next biggest. 2 more questions. The strategic rebalancing to Asia is best described as a welcome change from overly Middle East-centric U.S. policies of the recent past, an inevitable response to historical trends enhancing the strategic significance of Asia, C, a worthy initiative likely to be frustrated by continuing urgent problems in the greater Middle East, D, the preferred answer of this group, all of the above, or E, other. And the leading answers tied are B and D. So historical trends and then all of the above. And finally, among the most urgent non-traditional national security initiatives, other than getting our economic house in order, the U.S. can develop, the one that is most pressing is a comprehensive national energy policy, a national program to attract investment, a national program to enhance education, training, and attract talent, a national program to develop the technologies and industries of tomorrow, or other, which of course we will discuss later in questions. And the answer to this is 37% on C, a national program to enhance education, with energy policy being the next one. Okay, so we have some idea of what the group is talking about here. As we were walking in here, we had a little conversation about the FP 100 leading thinkers, and one of the questions being discussed with the leading thinkers had to do with a topic that's been hotly debated in Washington in the course of the past couple of years, America's a relative decline, and is that a real thing, a perceived thing? Washington Convention. Where do you come out on that?
Well, but first of all, David, thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it. And David, of course, knows a lot of things about a lot of things. He knows really more than anybody about the National Security Council. He's one of the great scholars of the National Security Council. And I've learned a lot from reading his work on that, and look forward to his continued study on it. But really has a deep understanding of the policymaking process, its history, and its functions, and it's much appreciated.
Thank you. Those are clearly the best opening remarks that anybody today has offered.
Yeah. The second thing I'd like to say is that I know you're working on this conference today with the State Department Policy Planning Office, and Jake Sullivan, who's a close colleague of mine, and is really one of the star talents at the State Department and American foreign policy today. And the third thing I'd like to say before I get to your question is the importance of conferences like this and the importance of the creation of intellectual capital. You know, as I reflected on this, I was in Boston flying back this morning. It is a very difficult task for a policymaker to avoid cascading crises, a deep inbox, the issue of the day, and to focus on the broader trends and to focus on those things which are going to be really important in the United States over the long haul. And inputs like this are really important for that. It's a constant challenge for me to set aside the time and put in place the processes that can really deal with broader trends and long-term challenges. So thank you for this conference. On the decline issue, a couple of things on that. And again, it is kind of a hot topic and discussed in groups like this. And reflecting on it, a couple of opening points, and then maybe give some specifics. One is that this, of course, is not a new debate in the United States. We go through cycles of doubting whether or not we're still moving forward, whether or not we're still the preeminent country in the world, whether or not we're on the decline path. And again, we could track those, right, from World War II till today. But it seems to me that the American polity, the American society, has in it an instinct to ask this question constantly. And in that instinct is the roots of our renewal. It is really an American characteristic to ask, how are we doing? Are we advancing? Are we doing better than everybody else, right? And to take corrective action to ensure that. And it really is kind of an inherent quality, I think, in America. And we've seen that over and over again through our history. And I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. The other thing I think of a general nature to keep in mind is to beware of straight line projections. And also not to be just stuck with kind of quantitative measurements. That there's a lot more to leadership and a lot more to power, frankly, than that. You know, the old measures of power, you would sit here really 25 or 30 years ago and you'd measure steel production and things like this, right? You know, power is a much more complicated thing today in today's world and going forward. And as I thought about this question, and again, we were talking about it because you asked each of the Global 100 honorees, right, if you will, what they thought about this issue, and there was a mix. I think most people were on the side of renewal, frankly, and that's clearly where I am. I'm not on the side of decline at this point. If you look at it, start with the hard number things. On the economy, we have the largest economy, but we also have a qualitatively different economy than a lot of our competitors in the world, including our per capita income, of course. It's probably 6 or 7 times that of China, for example. In that economy, we have an exceedingly innovative society. And it's not just, it is really a societal thing. I mean, if you think about the great inventions, right, the great innovations during our lifetimes, right, you'd find most of the roots in America, right, there. And it really is a huge strength of the United States. Third, that, of course, is undergirded by a very strong advanced education system. You know, I saw a Singapore study recently which had 17 of the top 20 universities in the country were from the United States, and we only have 5% of the world's population. Extraordinary statistic, and a huge a huge advantage for the United States. Again, fourth, in terms of the hard stuff, and not commented upon a lot when they do these relative decline and relative power comparisons, is our geography. 2 oceans, secure borders, and a fertile, very large landmass. That is a huge strength for the United States, right? And we take it for granted, but that's not the way a lot of places in the world are, right? At this point, including some of our competitors. And of course, next you'd have our military strength. Our military expenditures, I think, now are probably greater than any of the next 10 countries combined. And really, in terms of force protection going forward, nobody will match the United States in any relevant time frame. Next, on kind of again, these are kind of the classic things you'd see on a balance and asset and liability sheet, if you will, for the United States. Next is something that's not talked about a lot, and I've been thinking about it a lot in terms of assets we have that nobody else has. And that would be the alliance system that we have. No other country in the world has a global alliance system. It's been put together over 50 or 60 years now of bipartisan work. We have the ability anywhere in the world to work with allies with whom we have shared threat assessments, habits of cooperation, deep investments, and both in Europe and in Asia. And that's an asset that none of our competitors will have. And it's a huge asset for the United States, and one that we need never to take for granted and to actually work on constantly. We also obviously have a set of values that are very attractive to the world. There's a big difference between leadership in the world and just having leverage. And we have leadership qualities. I saw it just last week. The president traveled to Southeast Asia last week. We went to Thailand, Burma, and Cambodia for the East Asia Summit. The United States is at the center, of these in Asia. Huge demand signal for U.S. leadership. And at the very same time we were on that trip, the United States was in the center of working with the Egyptians and the Israelis to bring it into the Gaza crisis. The United States is in the middle, and it is this attractive leadership quality, this tradition of leadership, I think, that is very strong for the United States. And the last one I'll mention is energy, which, again, if you were doing an update of the balance sheet, assets and liabilities, this is one you would have to put on. Now, you wouldn't have put this on 4 years ago, right? And you've written a lot about this, Dave, and I see folks in the room who are more expert in this than I am. If you took the assumptions about the United States energy posture that were prominent in the private sector predictions 5 years ago, they would have said, well, we were going to have to import twice as much natural gas as we were importing then. There would be shortages of oil, right? And now, the International Energy Agency published 2 Mondays ago their most recent study, which has the United States on track to be the largest producer of oil in the world by 2020. I think we either are or about to become the largest producer of natural gas in the world, which is a tremendous turn. Really, all the assumptions 4 or 5 years ago have been turned on their head. Now, and the geostrategic aspects of this, we're just becoming, I think, just starting to deal with and understand. And indeed, the economic impacts, I think we're now just beginning to understand in terms of balance of payments and revenues to government, job creation, and many other things. So I think it has to be put on it. Now, there are challenges, and I'll finish on this. But the challenges, I think, fall into the category generally of not inherent, but those of political will and governance. And I see Tom Mann and my Professor Norm Ornstein. In the fall of 1973, I went into my first class, first day of college. And my professor for Politics 101 was Norm Ornstein. Somehow Ornstein had a PhD at age 14. But he and Norman and Tom Mann, who is here today, have written a very important book, I think, about the challenges of governance in the United States. And that really is where it sits, I think. We have these, what Zbigniew Brzezinski calls in his book, Strategic Vision, these tremendous residual assets, right, and resources. They aren't matched by anybody in the world and won't be. And the challenge then is to make sure that we make the best use of them. And so that's a very powerful place for the United States to be. Its future is in its own hands.
But it's a powerful place, and it's a great place to start the conversation, because clearly, as you saw from the group, they see our financial position as the pivotal national security question, going forward. And I want to ask a quick follow-up question on this issue of decline because it pertains to that, and then move on to another. But we talk about growth, and certainly there's some new growth drivers such as energy that you've talked about, and innovation and education continue to drive it. But something else seems to have happened in the past 10 years. We had GDP growth, but we had median incomes decline. We had social inequality grow. We had productivity grow, but job creation decline. That's breaking with 70 years, that's breaking with most of our history. And I just wonder if you're concerned that something within our model requires some fundamental rethinking in order for us to take advantage of these prevailing winds that seem quite encouraging.
Yeah. Well, I'm not the president's economic advisor.
I know.
Obviously. But I'll say a couple of things about that. From the perspective of national security, the central challenge, one of the central challenges, if you asked me to list essentially the key elements of our strategy since coming into office, and again, we came into office at a time of deep economic crisis, and we came into office at a time, and it's a complicated story as to why, at a period of real challenge to American prestige and authority. And we set about putting together a strategy to deal with that. And the first and foremost goal had to be economic renewal. There aren't a lot of iron laws in history, but one of them I think is that a country can't retain its political and military primacy without, and the President said this in his West Point speech, without maintaining its economic vitality. So it really is at the core of our foreign policy, and I think that in our national security, and I think that the President's approach here has been obviously economic renewal. And by the way, the choices made by the United States, and again, now in my wheelhouse, right, as opposed to deep economic policy, but in kind of comparative assessments, the choices that the United States made during the crisis have turned out to be, from a policy perspective, the right choices. I mean, if you look at the United States, it's one of the only developed countries in the world, right, that has recovered to its pre-crisis levels of growth today. The United States has had 29 straight months of private sector job growth. These were policy choices that other countries, by the way, in the world didn't make in terms of investment and the scale of the effort that the United States undertook from the Bush administration into the Obama administration in 2009. Very important. Now, I think that, the model issue you laid out is most powerfully presented, it has been to me again, and again, I'm not an expert in this area, right? Ed Luce's book.
He's here someplace, so I think he's glad to hear you.
There
Ed,
he is. How are you? Hopefully we've sold a couple of books here, right? All right, yeah. But Ed,
gradually you're going to work on everyone's book.
Yeah. Ed's book really it makes an argument, right? And you interviewed him, I know, at some length about this. Ed's book makes a set of arguments here that have to be confronted, I think. And I think that the President's approach is doing that in terms of the kinds of investments that have to be made in the kinds of skills that are needed in a modern economy, and the kinds of industries like in energy that we need to develop. We've made a lot of progress, I think, in that area. So I agree with you. I think these require policy responses and policy options. But again, David, I don't know that any of that is an inherent problem for the United States, if you will, or an inherent long-term problem that can't be solved by policy choices. And I'll finish up on answering a question on this, which is that policy choices make a big difference. And we saw that, I think, coming out of the crisis. We saw that, frankly, with policy choices made in the 8 years before the President came into office. And everybody makes policy choices which turn out better or worse. But these policy choices make a big difference, and I think with respect to the economy moving forward, they'll make a big difference.
Well, let's use that as a jumping-off point towards the broader theme that we're talking about here today, which is transformational trends. Mm-hmm. Clearly, you're one of the best-read national security advisors that we have, and I've been in your office and seen the desk piled with reading on all of these kinds of things, and I think it's a good time to look back, right? We're 4 years into this, but sometimes when I talk to people, they seem to forget where we were 4 years ago. And that, if you look at the U.S. reputation in the world, if you look at what was preoccupying us, if you look at our national security priorities, they were all rather different then. And I was just wondering if you might take a moment or two to say, when you came in, and I know you came in as deputy and then you took over, but when you came in and you took over as national security advisor, what did you change? What did you feel needed to be changed?
Yeah.
What were the fundamental sort of retoolings that were essential to coping to the new era?
Yeah, and that's evolved, obviously, over the 4
Right.
years, because we're facing a number of challenges now which were not predicted at that point, and including, I know we'll talk about it probably during the session, including the revolutions in the Arab world. Essentially, our analysis was this: that, and again, this is not a partisan comment, but the 8 years before it had been a time of great exertion in American foreign policy. And there had been a lot of capital spent to take on very big projects. And it was our judgment that what needed to happen at that point was a restoration, a real focus on the platform that needed to be put in place for the restoration of American power, prestige, and authority in order for us to pursue our interests and to reset and rebalance a number of policies coming out of it. So number one, obviously, was on the economy, and we've talked about that. The second was a real focus on alliances that had been, again, through a period of kind of exhausting exertion, put under strain, and we went about as a strategic matter, understanding the importance of alliances as a strategic asset, the renewal of our alliances. And I think our alliances, I think it's fair to say, people will give their own grades to this, obviously, but I think our alliances, both in Europe and in Asia, are in quite good shape after a tremendous amount of effort. The third was a concentration on great power relationships. In China, we've engaged deeply, and we have a lot of continuity from the last administration to our administration. In Russia, we undertook a very aggressive effort to engage Russians. Why? Again, from a strategic perspective, that said this: that if great power relationships are in a productive and constructive place as a piece of your platform, you can get a lot done in the world. And if they're off track, you're going to have difficulty. And we put a lot of effort in trying to get them on track. The fourth area was, and it goes to one of the questions that you asked, David, in the poll earlier, is on the effort around alliances and partnerships of the future. And thinking about what are the groups of countries that we're going to need together to solve problems going forward, and essentially the emerging countries, right? Emerging powers of Turkey and India. And we can talk about this at any length you want, set about a conscious effort with those countries. Next was to ask ourselves the following question. And it's about rebalancing, but rebalancing is not just about Asia. I spent, as you know, an enormous amount of time on this project, but it's a lot more than that. And the question presented was this. A new administration comes in, and you ask yourself, where are we overinvested, where are we underinvested, like you would if you were taking over any organization, right? Where are we out of balance? Where have we not paid enough attention, right? And where are we over invested? And the judgment was made that there were a lot of different aspects to this, but from a geographic perspective, that we were overinvested in the Middle East in military actions, and underinvested in terms of our general presence and activity in Asia. And we undertook a conscious effort to rebalance that. Now, we had a lot of other pieces to that, rebalancing our effort in the counterterrorism area from a broader effort to a more targeted area, but a number of these things. But a key geographic one was on that. And the next thing we asked ourselves is, do we have the institutions in the world, the architecture, if you will, to pursue our efforts? And you've asked that question here, too. And we determined that we didn't. Instead about, again, we can go into some detail on this, instead about trying to put that together in terms of managing financial crises, for example, something you're deeply knowledgeable about, moving from the G8 structure to the G20 structure. Why? Because the G8 structure didn't represent enough of the GDP in the world to be the relevant place to do the kind of crisis management that was necessary. Looking to Asia. Do we have a security and political structure there where there was a forum to talk about political issues, strategic issues? And we didn't. And we've now worked very hard on building up the East Asia Summit to do that. Economic structures in Asia. We've moved forward in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So those were a number of the things we thought we had to do. And again, we took a number of affirmative initiatives as well, particularly in the nuclear arms area. But that was essentially the first task that we thought we had.
Okay, well, that was a big task. And I'm going to ask two more questions. And I'm just giving this as a heads up to Susan, who will then sort of go out and seek questions from some of the folks in the... Yeah, there's more authors. More authors who need equal time.
Right,
here.
I see.
But let me ask you two more questions before we do that. The first has to do with as we change our models and as we look at things that have changed, a lot has changed. But one thing that some critics argue has not changed is our stance towards defense spending, and which is a centerpiece, obviously, of national security planning. And indeed, running a policy operation, a government, is a lot like running a company. The critical decisions are asset allocation decisions. And the United States has decided since the Second World War that we were going to spend the majority of our discretionary monies on defense. And during the Cold War, this made some sense. And then the Cold War ended, and we pivoted to an analog theory of the war on terror, which cost the same amount. But now, as you look at a country that spends as much as the next 17 countries added up, most of those countries are our allies. Yeah. Almost none of them are our enemies, and we're broke. You would think that there would be a fundamental change in the way that we look at defense spending, and yet that hasn't happened. It's been a very incremental argument from both sides of the aisle, and I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
A couple of things on that. First of all, with respect to the activities that we asked our military to undertake, we did make the decision coming in, the President campaigned on in 2008, that we would bring to an end our military effort in Iraq, and we've done that. We're going from 160,000 soldiers there when the President came in down to basically a diplomatic and normalized presence in Iraq, a very big project. We are undertaking a similar project in Afghanistan. Now, we have more work to do there, but we are on track. We just have recovered our surge of 33,000 troops as of this past September, and we'll continue on the path to really finishing that mission, right? The current mission, the current military mission by the end of 2014. Those are huge changes in footprint and face to the world. That's the first general point I wanted to make, and I'll get to the defense thing. Those are very big decisions that were made, and those are in terms of personnel and materiel, but also, very importantly, as I said, our face to the world. There's a very big decisions that are being implemented right now. So we'll now have a very big change in our footprint. Is the first point. The second is that's beginning to be reflected in our defense budgeting. Coming out of the Budget Control Act, passed by the Congress last year, we were required on the defense side to show reductions over the next 10 years of about $490 billion. Now that's I think about 5%, so it's actually I think that's already being undertaken by the United States. And that's being implemented. And with the way we did it was interesting. The initial response to that would be, in any organization, okay, we'll continue to do everything we're doing, but everybody's going to have to take 5% off. Right? That's the way it would be in the first meeting in any company or any organization, and that's not what happened here. Well, it is what happened. That was the initial response. The President said, well, that's not the way we should do this. That's not the way we're going to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves where we need to invest, and how do we do the things we need to do really well and stop doing some other things. And that's what our strategy, which was announced this past January, does. So we are on track here to take about $490 billion reduction over plan over the next 10 years. Last thing I'll say about this is that we ask our military to do an awful lot, and the resources are important to that, obviously. And we have built up a number of we have had a lot of wear and tear on the military over the last 10 years, and that's going to have to be addressed. And we do have new challenges that are going to have to be addressed, including our rebalancing to Asia. So we ask our military to do a lot. We are undertaking a fairly substantial reduction in military budgets over the next 10 years. I'm sure it'll be debated going forward, but I think we've made some pretty fundamental changes.
Okay, my last question it has to do with something that we touched upon in an earlier discussion. We had a bunch of the former heads of policy planning here talking about the perils and pitfalls of policy planning and whether one could even actually do policy planning. And Sandy Berger, one of your predecessors who's sitting here, has famously said that in Washington, the urgent always overtakes the important. And you know, a lot of your job, and like that of your predecessors, is a little bit akin to jazz. You know, things happen, you've got to improvise on it. And I think one of the biggest challenges in the national security area in this regard has been the Arab Spring and its aftermath. And I think one of the things that's come up most frequently here today is the complexity of, you know, figuring out who to bet on. You know, you have an ally in Egypt, and all of a sudden the government changes. And there's a democratic process or something seemingly democratic, and that's not a bad thing. And it produces something, and then you have to figure, how do we do that? And you're constantly being whipsawed by that. And I was just wondering what your reflections are on that, and particularly the challenges in dealing with it. For example, an ally like Egypt that is now got a question mark over it.
A couple of things in that. First of all, this is a very big challenge, right? As I said at the outset, to focus on longer-term challenges, longer-term priorities for the United States, and at the same time deal with all the things that enter your inbox every day. The first thing with respect to the Arab Spring, if you will, is to have a very clear idea of what happened and what was going on, right? And it was, it had its, again, it's part of it's the next step, I think, in the trend of a global political awakening and individual empowerment, fueled by technology and communications, and obviously by years and years of failed governance and the failure of governments to deliver for their people in the region. It is indigenous. That's very important to understand. It was not, despite a lot of the discussion that took place in the Arab world around the time of the January of 11 and on. It was not brought on by the outside world. It was indigenous, right? This is not due to the United States. It was not due to Iran. It was an indigenous set of circumstances. It's very different in each country too. Each of these countries have different sectarian makeups, different political situations, and different economic levels of development. Very important, I think, to understand. So you have to understand and have a clear-eyed view as to what the facts are. Second, you have to have a set of principles that you're trying to apply generally. And I think we've gone about doing that. Again, we stand against violence, for fundamental rights, and for responsive governments. Next, you have to have a clear idea of where your core interests are in the region, and then to be clear with these emerging governments about what those interests are and what their relationship and how it can be built. Now, with respect to Egypt, this is obviously a new circumstance. I mean, it's not. You couldn't have contemplated 2.5 years ago that the United States would be as its principal interlocutor in Egypt and running the government, Muslim Brotherhood president. And it's a fundamental change, and it's a challenge to our diplomacy, to broaden out our relationships in the society, and to forge a relationship with this new government. It's a challenge for them too, though. New to government, having to keep their economy together, to keep their polity together. And to date, I think it has gone. I think it's gone pretty well. The President Obama, President Morsi have a pretty good relationship. It's been a very practical relationship. I do think, again, the challenges here of us being clear about what our priorities are is important, and we've been clear on that. You know, we do expect our partner and ally in Egypt to uphold the peace treaty with Israel. We do need to continue to work on our counterterrorism coordination and cooperation. We do have a fundamental outlook with respect to the challenge from Iran in the region. The big challenge for them, as I said, though, is really economic. And Egypt and the Arab world right now is the main game, David. And they have substantial economic challenges coming out of the revolution. They are working through their work with the IMF, which is going to be very important. And that's going to require Egypt, though, to have a face to the world, if you will, that is welcoming of outside investment and economic relationships. And I think that's an important aspect of this going forward. So yes, new challenges, a completely new set of players, but having a set of principles and a clear idea of what your interests are, being able to change, right? The entirely different way of diplomacy with a country like Egypt right now than we had for 3 decades. And having that flexibility, I think is critical.
Okay, I'm going to ask one follow-up because Susan has to walk all the way over to John Alterman here, who I had said, or Ed could give the microphone in a second. But let me ask you a quick follow-up as we're doing that. Don't you feel a bit whipsawed sometimes? I mean, I think the journalistic world was whipsawed, right? The Gaza thing was solved, and there were a bunch of headlines on how helpful the Egyptians were. And 2 days later, there were constitutional changes afoot in Egypt, and everybody was like, well, wait a minute, weren't these the guys we were celebrating yesterday? And I mean, it's very tough to maintain a public face to a region like that.
No, but we are, but you have to have an understanding of it. We're in early stages. These are early chapters here, and there are going to be ups and downs. And indeed, you have to be clear, though. We've been clear with the Egyptian government here that we encourage a dialogue and compromise, right, to work through the constitutional issues, which is really what's on the table right now in Egypt, and to have as broad a base of support for those changes in the new constitution as you can have. The Egyptian revolution was not about the concentration of power in any one person or branch of the government, and that's a challenge for the Egyptian government, and one that they're trying to work through. If you have a recognition of the fact that these are complicated dynamics, that it's at early stages, have a general sense of what the dynamics are. Again, have an eye on your core interests. Be flexible in terms of the kind of diplomacy that you need to engage in. You manage it, and I don't feel whipsawed.
Okay, all right. John.
Yeah. John, thank you very
Okay,
much.
hi, John.
I'll send you my books and you can plug them later.
Yes.
Okay.
I want to respond to the challenge about thinking about what's not in your immediate inbox.
Yes.
And that is, you talk a lot about alliances and building relationships with other countries, but it seems to me over the course of history, states have become more powerful relative to actors within their borders, and they're becoming less powerful relative to actors within their borders. Partly we're talking about terrorism, organized crime, cyber, the ability of businesses to move money around the world, the ability of businesses to carry out operations that are much more complex than the regulator's ability to understand the business model. Does that increasingly complex reality mean that we need institutions and structures, initiatives for the U.S. government to deal not only with states, but to deal more effectively and strategically with a whole range of increasingly sophisticated and capable non-state actors?
Well, we certainly need strategies to deal with each of these with each of these challenges. But it's interesting, John. I'd say in the first instance, a number of the things that you outlined there are challenges across borders, transnational challenges that we face, right, that have emerged as a result of a lot of trends, including technology. In the first instance, that requires interstate cooperation. I mean, to the extent that you're going to put an appropriate regulatory regime together to deal with the challenges like the ones you've outlined, to the extent you're going to meet the challenges like in the counterterrorism area, which only can effectively be dealt with over time with state-to-state understandings, responsibilities, and projects. So that'd be my first answer to your question. I do think that the kind of state-to-state cooperation, setting norms, regimes, taking physical action, are in the first instance will require interstate cooperation. And in the first instance, I think, goes back to the list that I was going through in response to David's question about how the United States can best deal with these problems, and how we thought from the beginning we had to, which is, again, alliances and great power cooperation and identifying the new kinds of coalitions and partnerships that we would need going forward. It also means focusing and making sure that the international institutions, the multilateral institutions that we have, are focused on the new challenges, have the support and the resources to deal with these kinds of challenges. So that would be my core answer to you.
Thanks. Susan.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Can you hear us back here? We're
Yeah.
doing our bit for the side wing of this great gathering. Thank you so much for engaging in this conversation today. And I wanted to bring in to the conversation one of our global thinkers who's on this leadership, who comes to us, I would say, straight from your inbox in a way. Parnaz Isfahani has been speaking out in an outspoken way in her home country of Pakistan. And I think she gives us also a sense with her question of the challenge of talking about strategic issues when there are so many
Yes.
burning, pressing ones. So thank you so much, Partner Hudson. We're going to try to get to a few more questions, too, before you have to run off and leave us.
Thanks, Susan.
Mr. Donilon, my question for you today, you referred earlier to fixing policy where it was out of balance.
Yes.
So my question has two parts. In terms of Pakistan and Afghanistan, where does your administration stand today in terms of fixing things which are out of balance? And the second part is, what did your AFPAC policy of lumping Pakistan and Afghanistan together, do you think it was successful?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. With respect to the balance in our policy towards Afghanistan and Pakistan, I guess let me start with this. We came into office focused on identifying precisely what our goals needed to be in Afghanistan, and went through a rigorous process of identifying a set of goals that we became convinced we could actually achieve, and that were most important to our national interest. And those goals essentially came down to two categories. One is the strategic defeat of al-Qaeda and the associated groups that would threaten the United States. After all, the reason that we were in Afghanistan was because the plot that killed 3,000 people in the World Trade Center and in Pennsylvania and at the Pentagon emanated from the borders of Afghanistan, and that was the project that we took upon. And we put in place a very focused, relentless effort, focused, by the way, on those individuals and those groups that posed the greatest threat to the United States and had hatched this plot and executed this plot against the United States. That's the first goal. And I think we're on the track in South Asia in terms of core al-Qaeda of moving closer to that goal. Not done at this point, and there are obviously global issues with respect to terror groups and offshoot groups, but nonetheless, that's our goal, and we're on the track, I think, to achieving that goal. The second was to not have, after we finish our work with respect to the principal military operation there, not to have Afghanistan once again be a safe haven, if you will, or a safe place for the terrorist groups like al-Qaeda to operate from, and to have a modicum of stability with respect to the Kabul government going forward after we finish our primary military operation in 2014, although that won't be the end of our support for Pakistan. And I think that in terms of balance, that identifying those goals with precision and having our main lines of effort aimed towards the achievement of those goals was very important. And I think those goals are achievable by the United States. And we have a path to our end of the principal military operation right now between now and 2014. With respect to Pakistan, this has been a relationship where we have had a lot of cooperation. Indeed, one of our principal counterterrorism partners in the world has been Pakistan. The Pakistani people and Pakistani government has lost thousands of people in their fight against extremism inside the borders of Pakistan. As I said, their cooperation with the United States has been absolutely critical in terms of our efforts in the counterterrorism area. We have had ups and downs, though, and we have had disagreements. And they have been around a number of issues, including sovereignty issues, for example, on the part of the Pakistani government. An example of that, of course, was the bin Laden raid. The raid in May of 2011 against the Abbottabad, Pakistan compound of bin Laden was one that the Pakistani government reacted sharply to as a matter of sovereignty. I think the decision that we made to take this unilaterally was the right decision. But nonetheless, when we were making the decision, we actually sat and understood that there would be a price to be paid, and we thought the price was obviously was well worth it in terms of having a period of time where we were going to have a difficult time with Pakistan. And we've had other instances, including this terrible cross-border incident a year ago, November, where a number of Pakistani soldiers were killed. And that caused, obviously, a political response in Pakistan. Today, I think, we don't have a crisis between the United States and Pakistan, some individual crisis that we're having to deal with. And it's allowing us, and Secretary Clinton's been working on this very hard, it's allowed us to have a broader and more strategic discussion about the relationship between Pakistan and the United States. And I think that's an important moment for us now to sit down and ask ourselves this question. At the end of the day, is there really a strategic divergence between the interests that Pakistan and the United States has? What has been the source of the points of friction? How can Pakistan support, for example, reconciliation efforts in Afghanistan and do so in a sincere and bona fide way? How can Pakistan do more to deal with the safe haven issue which we have across the border? And these discussions are ongoing now, and I think we're at a period here where we don't have a kind of a front and center crisis, if you will, that's taking all the oxygen, political oxygen in Pakistan and in the relationship. And so that's ongoing, I think, right now. I think it's an opportunity for us to think about kind of our joint interest in a stable South Asia and a stable Afghanistan between now and the end of 2014, again, when we finish our military mission. With respect to AFPAC, I do think that it was, I think it was an important concept. And you know, when you think about it, we have been engaged in a major military operation in Afghanistan for a long period of time now. We have had obviously some disagreements, but we also had, as I said, tremendous cooperation from the Pakistani government in a number of areas as well. And that's been important to our effort there. Do we have complete strategic alignment as a result of that effort at this point? No, I don't think so, but I think it's a work in progress.
Okay, we have time for one more question, short answer.
Okay, speaking of works in progress, Ed Luce, very grateful for the plug, but he's promised not to pull his punches in a final question.
I see. All right. Hello, Ed.
Yeah, I'm not going to mention my book, but thank you for mentioning it. Taking you back also, like Farnaz did, to 4 years ago,
Yeah.
your first week in office, the two key priorities of problem solving were AFPAC, as you've just mentioned, and the Israeli-Palestine peace process. Now, you've just used AFPAC in the past tense. You said it was a useful context.
Well,
I think...
It didn't,
was that wrong?
Intentional is, yeah.
Okay, it is a useful concept. Clearly, a lot of people see the Arab-Israeli process in the past tense as well. It's very much at the beginning of your second term, conspicuous in its absence. And can I ask you, is that a wrong supposition? Do you have plans to try and revive that process in the second term?
Yeah, Ed, I think, again, we can have a longer conversation about it. I think that it is a wrong supposition. And that, in fact, we continue to be focused on this. Again, we were deeply involved in this over the last couple of weeks with respect to solving the Gaza crisis and working with the new Egyptian government and with the Israeli government to bring that to a ceasefire and bring that episode to at least a ceasefire situation. But no, it would be a wrong supposition to say that the United States does not intend to remain involved and in pushing for a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And we have a number of things we have to work through. There's a vote this afternoon at the United Nations. There are Israeli elections on January 22nd, as you know. And we're quite focused on what the opportunities might be going forward.
Tom's staff has been very clear that he's got a hard stop here in about 3 or 4 minutes. So we're going to have to wrap this up. You will all get a break as soon as we're done for half an hour to finish your desserts, and then we'll begin again at 2. I do want to say one thing, though, and that is Tom has graciously referred to the fact that I've written a bit on the National Security Council. I'm in the middle of writing a new book on the National Security Council from the middle of the Bush administration through now, and looking at the changes that have taken place. I try to do these things as an objective observer, and I think as a former Clinton administration official, you'll see that the models that I have sort of landed on as some of the best in the history of the NSC have often been in Republican administrations, Brent Scowcroft standing out among them. And I know Brent Scowcroft has been a model for Tom's work. I have to say, without giving away the ending of my book, that Tom's focus on the history, on the process, on those big piles of paper on his desk, on the new trends and what's coming next and how we adapt to them, and the intersection of economic and political, the intersection of security and issues like energy, that is forging a new kind of a model. And I think it's something that people in the future are going to look at and respect and admire. And for that reason, I am particularly glad we've had the opportunity for this conversation. And I hope all of you will join me in thanking Tom for a terrific lunchtime conversation.